From the remains of an ill-fated hot air balloon adventure in the North Pole to a prehistoric lunchbox over 3,000 years old, here are 10 of the wildest things ever found frozen in ice. Number 10. Airplane frozen in Antarctica. In the year 1988, a Lockheed C-130 airplane equipped with skis took off from near the McMurdo Station Antarctic Research Center. This in itself isn't overly impressive, except for the fact that before then, the plane had been frozen in the ice since 1971. The plane had been making a resupply run to the international station when it crashed 17 years before. It was declared a complete loss. The airplane was stripped for parts and it was left buried in the ice and snow. However, it turned out that new airplanes are way too expensive. 17 years later, the United States military realized that they needed the airplane back so that they could continue supplying their Antarctic station. Rather than spend millions of dollars on a new plane, they chose to salvage the original. A mission to dig up and restore the C-130 was put into action, and after quite a bit of work, the airplane was pulled from under 40 feet of ice and restored nearly to perfection. However, during the mission, 2 United States sailors were killed in 1987 when another supply plane crashed. It was tragic, but it only strengthened the crew's resolve to restore the plane. And finally, in 1988, they got it back up and running. What's the coldest place you've ever been? Very few people on planet Earth have actually been to Antarctica. But if you have, let me know about it. Even if you've been to Alaska or northern Canada, post a comment with your experience there. Did anything crazy happen because of the cold? After you comment, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to stay up to date with the latest amazing videos. Number 9. Hot air balloons over the North Pole. Imagine trying to fly a hot air balloon over the Arctic Circle. It seems like a foolhardy mission, yet there was indeed an expedition in 1897 in which a hot air balloon and its crew tried to sail over the North Pole. Rather than doing that, they crashed into the ice. It all began when a Swedish balloonist set out with his team to make history. However, after the balloon launched from the Arctic Ocean in July of 1897, it proved a complete disaster. After only 2 days of flying, the balloon lost its hydrogen and fell to the ice, where the crew set up camp on an uninhabited island in the middle of the Svalbard archipelago. It was there that the team succumbed to the horrifying environment and ultimately perished. But here is where the story gets really amazing. The remains of their camp, their equipment, and their bodies were discovered over 30 years later in 1930. Not only was all of their stuff found, but the bodies of the 3 expedition members were discovered, half eaten by polar bears. They also found their diaries, their cameras, and the film from the expedition. Amazingly, 93 photographs were extracted from what was found, and the results are an eerie look into the lives and deaths of these 3 brave souls. The photos are actually incredible, with shots captured of them taking off and of them crashing and setting up their camp. Number 8. A perfectly preserved human hand. Get ready for this next story because it is gruesome. On Mont Blanc in the French Alps, somebody found a perfectly preserved human hand that once belonged to passengers killed in a plane crash over 50 years ago. According to Metro News, Daniel Roche had been searching for human remains on the mountain for years, but had never found anything significant. Then, in 2017, he stumbled upon a hand frozen in the ice and part of a leg. It's pretty grisly stuff, but it's also a part of history. It's believed that the remains belong to 2 passengers from one of 2 Air India airplanes that crashed in the area. The first flight crashed into the side of the mountain back in 1950 and killed at least 48 people. And the second aircraft crashed near the summit in 1966 and killed all 117 passengers on board. According to the fellow who found the hand, the remains were likely from a female passenger from the 1966 flight. He says this because he also discovered one of the plane's jet engines in the same region. After discovering the hand, Daniel contacted emergency services and they flew the remains down from the mountain in a helicopter so that they could be properly examined by professionals. The local authorities then told news outlets that the remains were probably not from the same person, but it was really impossible for them to say. Interestingly enough, the discovery of the hand came just 2 weeks after the frozen remains of a couple were found perfectly preserved in the ice of the Swiss Alps. I guess the lesson here is that the next time you go mountain climbing, keep your eyes open for body parts. Number 7. A prehistoric lunchbox. Near Mont Blanc in France are the mighty Swiss Alps. But rather than talking about body parts, this discovery was a very strange time-traveling lunchbox. According to Live Science, it seems that 3,500 years ago, a brave traveler lost their lunchbox while climbing the Swiss Alps. Archaeologists recently found a wooden vessel that had been stuck in the ice near the top of the mountain for thousands of years. By using chemical analysis, researchers were able to determine the contents of the box. They actually found faint traces of cereal. Whoever had been scaling the mountain had been eating a type of cereal consisting of wheat and rye, probably a type of ancient porridge. Researchers say that most boxes made from things like wood or leather almost never survive in archaeological records. But because the lunchbox had been frozen in the ice for so long, it had remained relatively unbroken. They also say that these lightweight types of boxes were often used to store food on long journeys when pilgrims were going over these snowy mountain passes. But you might be wondering why on earth somebody was walking in such a dangerous place over 3,000 years ago. The answer is that archaeologists believe there were passes through the mountains that our ancient ancestors had to use to get from one side to the other. Number 6. A polar princess. One of the most incredible mummies ever has been discovered close to the Arctic Circle. She's being called the Polar Princess, and she's miraculously preserved even after 900 years of being frozen. Her face and features are disturbingly clear, and she even still has her eyelashes. According to the report from the Daily Mail, she was only around 35 years old when she died. And she was also the only woman buried amongst roughly 3 dozen men. This happened somewhere in the 12th century, and the woman was wrapped in a cocoon of copper and fur and then buried in the permafrost. The cold temperature kept her immaculately preserved, and you can even see that she still has a full head of hair and her earrings. The mummy was initially dug up by archaeologists investigating a burial site in the north of Russia. The archaeologists are claiming that the Polar Princess was a member of a mysterious medieval civilization, one that held much power in the polar region and had some vague connections to the Persian Empire. But what's really puzzling archaeologists is the fact that the Polar Princess was the only adult female found inside the necropolis. It likely means that she was an elite member of the society, but who exactly the woman was is still a mystery. Number 5. Spears in Yellowstone. Researchers have found ancient hunting weapons in the melting ice near Yellowstone National Park that date back 10,000 years. The discovery was announced by the University of Colorado, with a research associate coming forward to say that they found a spear-like wooden dart, which had been frozen in a sheet of ice before it recently melted. The strange prehistoric spear was crafted of birch, and it kind of looks like a bent tree branch. The discovery was made probably because of the global temperatures causing the glaciers and fields of ice in the area to melt, releasing all kinds of precious artifacts. The experts are saying that the dart still had personal markings on it from an ancient hunter when it was found. The dart was roughly 3 feet long with a sharp point on one end and a cup on the other end that would have attached to a hook. The instrument was flung at prey to achieve a high velocity and greater accuracy. Picture a sling with a rock in it, except the sling had a 3-foot spear in it and could be used for killing deer and all kinds of other animals. Number 4. Allen Hills Meteorite. A meteorite, believed to have come from Mars, was found at the Allen Hills ice field in Antarctica way back in 1984. This is a fairly odd discovery, but for the past almost 50 years, it's been the source of a lot of arguments and controversy. The meteorite weighed only 4.2 pounds when it was discovered, and researchers believed that it crystallized from the magma on Mars roughly 4.5 billion years ago. If true, it makes it one of the oldest rocks ever to have been discovered. If you're wondering how exactly a rock from Mars got to Earth, it's actually pretty common. When a meteorite or asteroid hits Mars, sometimes pieces of rock are blasted off the Martian surface, and over time, slowly enter Earth's orbit and fall to the surface. That's what happened with this Martian rock somewhere around 13,000 years ago. But the reason it's such a source of controversy is that in 1996, a NASA scientist carried out a microscopic and chemical analysis on the meteor, then claimed that the carbonate grains found on it were produced by Martian microorganisms. This is because the carbonate grains are associated with compounds that are organic, and they contain very small crystals of iron materials that are similar to what is produced by bacteria on Earth. In essence, some scientists believe that the Allen Hills meteorite is evidence of alien life from Mars. This hasn't been widely accepted, but it is some pretty compelling proof of life beyond our planet. Number 3. Viking Artifacts. Mountain glaciers reveal all kinds of cool stuff when they start melting. Recently, researchers found a small container crafted of birch bark on an ancient mountain pass in Norway that dated back to 400 AD. But this isn't just a lunchbox from some ancient pilgrim. It's a trove of Viking artifacts. The melting glaciers have revealed a full mountain pass that had been lost to time, where thousands of years ago, Vikings walked with their horses and their families, and where they tossed away a lot of their garbage. There have actually been a lot of different artifacts discovered. A new study published in the journal Antiquity claims that the mountain pass was likely used during the Roman Iron Age, from 300 AD until the Viking Age 700 years later in 1000 AD. Among the artifacts were horseshoes, the bones of horses, fragments of sleds, a walking stick carved with runes, and all kinds of other everyday objects the Vikings may have lost or just tossed aside because they didn't need them anymore. What's really cool is that because the items were frozen for so long, they now appear pretty much new. It's simply amazing how well things can be preserved in the ice. As for what the Vikings were doing up on the mountain, it was probably a very popular thoroughfare used for dairy and livestock farms situated at higher elevations. It was also a trade route used to transport goods outside of Norway, such as antlers and pelts. It was probably the easiest way to get out of Norway between the end of winter and the beginning of summer. Number 2. Frozen climbers. When you think about people frozen in ice, Mexico probably isn't the first location that comes to mind. However, in 2015, the bodies of 2 climbers were found mummified on the side of a Mexican mountain, and they had been there for over 50 years. The bodies were found inside of a glacier on the highest peak in Mexico, known as Pico de Orizaba. The discovery was made at an altitude of roughly 17,290 feet, when someone stumbled upon a head and a hand sticking out of the ice. Upon further investigation, it appeared that one of the corpses was clinging to the other, probably both pretty miserable in their final moments. As for the identity of these unfortunate mummies, they're thought to be 2 Mexican climbers who vanished in 1959 after their team of 7 was caught in a brutal avalanche. 4 of the team members survived, but 3 were reported missing and were presumed dead. After looking at the photographs of the newly discovered bodies, Luis Espinosa said he was very confident that they were indeed his friends who went missing on that fateful day. As for Luis, he was also caught in the avalanche, but managed to dig himself out of the snow and seek help. Authorities believe the body of the 3rd lost climber is somewhere in the area, but it's unclear as of now whether they'll find him or not. He could be buried deeper in the ice, and he might stay there for another 50 years. Number 1. Box of amazing photographs. Antarctica has been an amazing place for exploration. Over 100 years ago, there were many expeditions heading to the great frozen lands of Antarctica or up into the frigid north, and unfortunately, many of these expeditions were doomed before they even got started. However, the explorers still left quite the legacy behind, as they were part of what is known as the Antarctic Heroic Era. One of the most incredible finds of recent years was a box filled with negatives that had been lost over 100 years ago, after a group of explorers set out across Antarctica to set up supply depots. The box contained 22 unprocessed negatives that were taken by the photographer on the expedition. The box with the photos in it was found preserved in a block of ice inside one of the original shacks constructed by the expedition team. The discovery was made by conservators working with the New Zealand Antarctic Heritage Trust while they were restoring one of the old exploration huts. They believed that the negatives were left behind by the Ross Sea Party, which had gotten stranded on Ross Island after their ship blew out to sea in the middle of a blizzard. The negatives found were not in the best shape, but they were able to be restored, and the photos are simply amazing. A lot of the mission is documented in these old photographs, and it gives a real glimpse into the lives of the explorers. And the most impressive part? The Ross Sea Party was eventually rescued from the island after suffering only 3 fatalities. What do you wish you'd found? Would you explore these frozen places? Or is it too cold for you? Let me know your stories in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. See you next time for another great video right here on American Eye.